They say summer brings people together, but in one quiet town, it nearly tore the community apart. On a scorching July afternoon at the Duskboro Community Pool, a white HOA committee member named Karen Whitman confronted a black woman she didn't recognize and demanded she leave immediately. The woman, calm, graceful, floating in the shallow end with her eyes closed. Her name was Danielle Brooks, and what Karen didn't know was that Danielle had just moved into the neighborhood, as the town's new chief of police. What started as a petty confrontation spiraled into a full-blown scandal: 911 calls, viral videos, a public hearing, and a stunning moment when Danielle quietly revealed her badge, turning the tables with quiet strength. But the real twist? Karen would face the entire town, not in court, but in something far more personal. Want to know how justice, humility, and second chances collided? Stay with us, and don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories. Danielle Brooks had only lived in Duskboro for 2 weeks, but already, she could sense that this seemingly picture-perfect neighborhood had layers. On the surface, it was idyllic: neatly edged sidewalks, waving American flags on porches, and the smell of barbecue wafting through the air. Retirees walked their dogs in the early morning hours. Kids raced past on scooters in the afternoons. And by midday in July, the community pool at the Duskboro Recreation Center became the town's oasis, where neighbors gathered, splashed, and chatted beneath large blue umbrellas. For Danielle, the pool had been a rare chance to unwind. As the newly appointed chief of police for Duskboro, she had been juggling meetings, department walkthroughs, and paperwork since her arrival. But today, she had a break. No uniform, no radio, just her one-piece swimsuit, a towel, and a few precious hours under the sun. She had looked forward to this, floating on her back, the cool water lapping gently around her, the muffled sounds of laughter and splashes softening her thoughts. She felt, for a moment, like any other neighbor enjoying the afternoon. But not everyone saw her that way. From the far end of the pool, Karen Whitman sat on a lounge chair, eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses, her straw hat pulled low against the sun. She had lived in Duskboro for over a decade and took her unofficial role as neighborhood guardian very seriously. She knew who lived on which street, who attended which church, and who was late bringing in their trash cans. And today, she saw someone she didn't recognize. A black woman, alone, in her community pool. Karen's jaw tightened. She had heard a new resident had moved into the house on Maple Avenue, but no one told her it was a single woman, and certainly no one mentioned that she might be black. She watched as Danielle floated calmly, seemingly at ease, and the sight gnawed at her. Karen had made it her mission to protect the neighborhood, and in her mind, this meant challenging anyone she deemed out of place. She stood up, adjusted her sun hat, and began walking toward the shallow end of the pool. Flip-flops slapped against the concrete as she marched with purpose, the pages of her Better Homes and Gardens magazine fluttering on the chair she left behind. Danielle didn't notice her at first. She had just dipped under the water to cool off, then emerged with droplets trailing from her braids. When she opened her eyes and saw the woman standing at the pool's edge, arms crossed, Danielle offered a polite smile. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice calm. Karen didn't return the smile. "I haven't seen you around before," she said, removing her sunglasses slowly for dramatic effect. "Are you a member here?" Danielle blinked. "Yes, I am. I just moved into the house on Maple Avenue." Karen sniffed. "Oh. I wasn't aware of any new neighbors on that street. Are you visiting someone?" "Because this pool is for residents only." Danielle remained composed, though she could feel a tension rising in her chest. "I live there. I'm a homeowner. The membership came with the property. My card is in my bag right over there if you'd like to see it." Karen's lips curled into a faint smirk. "I think I'd better verify it with the HOA office. In the meantime, I'd like you to leave." Danielle's posture shifted, just slightly. Her expression didn't harden, but it grew more serious. "I'm not leaving," she said firmly. I told you, I'm a resident and a member. Karen placed her hands on her hips, raising her voice loud enough for a few nearby swimmers to pause. If you don't leave, I'll call the police. Danielle's heart skipped. The police? Her police? She swallowed hard. She hadn't wanted to play the badge card, not yet. She wanted to be seen as a neighbor first, not a symbol of authority. But Karen was pushing hard. You're seriously calling the police? Danielle asked, brows raised in disbelief. Karen pulled out her phone. Yes. For trespassing and being combative. Danielle didn't move. She stood in the shallow end of the pool, arms crossed over her chest, as Karen stepped to the side and began dialing. Around them, conversation stopped. A few parents gathered their towels. A teenager recorded the scene with his phone. The air felt charged, no longer relaxed, but electric with discomfort. When the two officers arrived, Officer Matt Higgins and Officer Clara Delgado, they were met with an agitated Karen waving her hands near the entrance. That's her, she said. She refuses to leave. I've never seen her before in my life. She got aggressive when I asked for her membership. The officers approached Danielle, who stood tall, her wet hair dripping down her back. Officer Higgins offered a cautious smile. Ma'am, we just need to confirm your membership, he said gently. Danielle nodded toward her lounge chair. Front pocket of the bag. My name's on the card. Officer Delgado retrieved it, glanced at the name, and then back at Danielle. Danielle Brooks, she read aloud. Karen, arms crossed, scoffed. That could be anyone's name. She could have found that card. Delgado gave her a tight-lipped look. I'll need to see your ID, she said to Danielle. Danielle stepped out of the pool and opened her wallet. She handed over her driver's license. Higgins took it, scanned the information, then matched it with the card. Everything checks out, he said. Karen's face went pale. But, Danielle said softly, reaching back into her bag, since we're verifying things, she pulled out a slim badge holder and opened it. Delgado's eyes widened slightly. Chief. Danielle gave a slight nod. Yes. Danielle Brooks, newly appointed Chief of Police, Dusk Borough. Karen took a step back. You're the new chief. Danielle nodded again, her voice calm but clear. Yes. And even if I wasn't, what you did today was unacceptable. Around them, several residents now watched openly, murmuring among themselves. A few had their phones out. Karen looked ready to melt into the pavement. I didn't know, Karen stammered. I was just doing what I thought was right. Danielle's expression didn't soften. You called the police on a neighbor enjoying a swim. You refused to look at my ID, ignored my explanations, and assumed I didn't belong. Karen's voice cracked. It wasn't because of race. Danielle raised a hand. Then what was it? Why did you assume I was a trespasser? Why did you escalate it so quickly? There was no answer. As the officers stepped aside with Danielle to take her statement and file a formal complaint for harassment, Karen stood frozen, surrounded by whispers and disapproving stares. Her carefully curated image as the HOA's protector was crumbling in real time. Later that evening, the footage of the incident hit social media. Captions like, "Racist Karen calls cops on new police chief," began trending locally. The fallout was swift. Neighbors began questioning not just Karen's behavior at the pool, but other incidents, comments made, warnings given, confrontations at the playground and dog park. And Danielle? She went home, dried off, and prepared for her first official department-wide meeting the next morning. She knew what she was walking into, an office used to a very different kind of leadership. But as she looked into the mirror, she straightened her shoulders and whispered to herself. This is what change looks like. Tomorrow, she would face the department. But today, she had already taken the first step, standing firm, with dignity, against the very biases she had come to dismantle. The next morning, the sun rose over Dusk Borough with deceptive calm. The birds chirped, lawn sprinklers ticked in rhythmic cycles, and the scent of fresh coffee drifted through kitchen windows. But for Danielle Brooks, the morning brought no peace. What had happened at the community pool wasn't just an uncomfortable encounter, it had become a local firestorm. Danielle sat at her kitchen table, a mug of black coffee in her hand and her tablet in front of her. Notifications flooded in, headlines from local blogs, reposts of the video from the pool, comments pouring in with every refresh. Karen Whitman tries to evict police chief from community pool. Dusk Borough's new chief faces racism on her day off. The calm clapback that left a Karen speechless. She sighed and rubbed her temples. She hadn't even been sworn in officially, and already, the entire town was talking about her, but not because of her qualifications, her leadership, or her vision for change. No, it was because of someone else's ignorance and assumptions. As she scrolled through the comments, Danielle noticed a few supportive ones from people she hadn't even met. Chief Brooks handled that with grace. Proud to have a woman like her leading our town. But there were others, too, people defending Karen, saying she had every right to be cautious, claiming it wasn't about race. The usual deflections. The usual excuses. At 9 a.m. sharp, Danielle stepped into the Dusk Borough Police Department headquarters for the first time as chief. The building itself was modest, a squat brick structure with a freshly painted exterior thanks to a recent municipal grant. Inside, the walls still carried the institutional chill of a place that had long operated without real introspection. Officers paused to glance at her as she walked through the hall, some out of curiosity, others out of respect, and a few with unreadable expressions. She made her way to the main briefing room, where nearly 30 officers were waiting, seated in rows of metal chairs. The air buzzed with anticipation. Everyone had heard about the pool incident by now. Everyone knew who she was. Danielle stepped up to the podium. Dressed in a navy blue blazer and crisp slacks, her badge clipped neatly to her belt, she looked every inch the leader she was. She cleared her throat. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice steady and measured. "I'm Chief Danielle Brooks. Some of you may have heard about me already, possibly for the wrong reasons." A ripple of chuckles moved through the room, quiet, cautious. "I didn't plan for my first interaction with this community to be that public," she said. "But life doesn't always wait for the perfect moment. What matters is how we respond." She paused, scanning the room. "I'm here to work with you. To listen, to lead, and to rebuild the relationship between law enforcement and the people of Dusk Borough. We have a lot of work ahead of us, some of it uncomfortable, all of it necessary." Officer Higgins, seated near the back, nodded. Officer Delgado gave a faint smile. "I've read the reports. I've looked over community feedback. There's good work being done here, but also a serious need for reflection. We serve everyone, not just those who look like us, talk like us, or live on the same street. That starts with how we treat each other in this room, and how we treat every person we encounter in this town." There were no interruptions. No pushback. Just a room full of officers taking in her words. "I'll be meeting with each of you over the next few weeks," Danielle continued. "I want to hear your perspectives, what's working, what's broken, and what we can do better. But make no mistake, I will not tolerate bias, discrimination, or abuse of power. Not in uniform, and not out of it." When she finished, a few officers clapped. It wasn't loud, but it was sincere. Later that day, Danielle met with the mayor and members of the city council at City Hall. The mayor, a silver-haired man named Warren Langston, greeted her with a careful smile and a firm handshake. "Chief Brooks," he said, "what happened at the pool, not exactly the welcome we intended for you." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "No, I suppose not." The mayor gestured toward a conference table. "There's some chatter," he said as they Saturday, "some residents think it's blown out of proportion." Others are angry that Karen Whitman hasn't issued a proper apology. And then there's the matter of your complaint. Danielle folded her hands. I filed that report to hold someone accountable for calling the police on me under false pretenses. If I don't follow through now, what message does that send to the rest of the community? The mayor hesitated. Of course. I just want to avoid unnecessary escalation. With respect, sir, Danielle said calmly, escalation already happened. I didn't start it. But I'm willing to help guide it towards something productive. That evening, Karen Whitman sat alone in her living room. Her once busy phone now buzzed with notifications she dreaded. Texts from people she knew, some offering lukewarm support, others questioning her judgment. Her social media was a disaster. Posts condemning her behavior. Memes. A video of her pointing at Danielle in the pool had reached over 50,000 views. The caption, "This didn't age well." She had tried to defend herself on Nextdoor, writing a long-winded post about civic duty and upholding standards. But the responses came fast and sharp. Some accused her of racism outright. Others pointed to a pattern, times she had questioned Latino teenagers at the park, a Middle Eastern family at the dog run, a young black couple having a picnic. Her world was unraveling. The neighborhood that once cheered her vigilance was now turning its back. And then, just when she thought it couldn't get worse, Karen received a letter. It was from the HOA board. They were convening a special meeting to discuss her behavior at the pool and her role in the HOA committees. That Thursday, nearly 40 residents showed up, far more than usual. The room was buzzing with tension. Karen sat in the front row, trying to look composed. The board president, Lester Wright, stood and opened the meeting. "We're here to address an incident that occurred at our community pool involving a resident, Miss Karen Whitman, and another resident, Chief Danielle Brooks." He detailed what had happened, referencing witness accounts, police reports, and the now viral video. This board must decide whether Miss Whitman's actions violated the principles of respect and inclusivity outlined in our HOA charter. Karen's hands trembled in her lap. Then, voices from the community spoke. "My name is Cynthia Moore," said a woman in a floral dress, rising from the second row. "I watched Karen accuse a Hispanic couple last year of trespassing at the playground. She demanded to see their IDs. I didn't speak up then, but I regret it." Others followed. A young man stood up and played the video he'd filmed. Karen's voice, unmistakable, rang out, "Call the police." It was damning. When it was Karen's turn to speak, her voice cracked. "I didn't know who she was," she said. "I just thought she didn't belong." Lester shook his head. "And that's the problem." The board voted 4-1 to remove Karen from all committee duties for the remainder of the year. The room was silent as she gathered her purse and exited, eyes averted, shoulders slumped. But the story didn't end there. A week later, Karen received another letter, this time from the city attorney's office. It offered her the chance to participate in a restorative justice program, a mediated meeting with Danielle Brooks, where both sides could speak openly, with the goal of mutual understanding. Karen didn't want to go. But with her reputation shattered and the threat of formal charges hanging over her, she agreed. And so, on a warm Tuesday afternoon, in a quiet conference room at City Hall, Karen sat across from the woman she had tried to evict. Danielle arrived looking calm, composed, and focused. A mediator, a kind-eyed woman named Ruth, welcomed them and explained the process. Karen fidgeted in her seat. "I'm sorry," she blurted out. "I didn't mean for it to go that far. I just thought I was protecting the neighborhood." Danielle's expression remained neutral. "But you weren't," she said. "You were protecting your assumptions. You saw me, and you decided I didn't belong. You didn't ask politely. You didn't wait. You called the police." Karen's eyes welled with tears. "I didn't realize what I was doing until it was too late." Danielle nodded slowly. You weren't the first person to judge me based on how I look. But you can be one of the first to learn from it. That's up to you. In that quiet room, amid apologies and hard truths, something rare happened. Karen truly listened. By the end of the meeting, she agreed to issue a public apology and participate in diversity and inclusion training through the community center. It wouldn't undo what happened, but it was a start. Danielle didn't expect Karen to change overnight. But she did believe in accountability, in growth, and in the idea that even the most uncomfortable conversations could lead to healing, if people were willing to sit through the discomfort. As Danielle walked out of City Hall that evening, she looked out over the town she had only just begun to know. There were still fences to mend, biases to break, and work to be done. But for the first time since she arrived, she felt something different in the air. Possibility. 2 weeks had passed since the restorative justice meeting between Danielle Brooks and Karen Whitman. While the bruises to pride and reputation still lingered, the conversation had set something in motion, something that neither of them, nor the wider community of Duskboro, could ignore. For Danielle, it marked a turning point. She hadn't come to Duskboro to make headlines, but if fate had handed her the spotlight, she would use it to illuminate change. As chief of police, Danielle knew reform didn't start in a press conference or with a new mission statement. It began in the culture of the department and the daily choices of officers. And so, she rolled up her sleeves. The first step was internal, a full departmental audit. She spent long nights reviewing past complaints, arrest records, and use of force incidents, cross-referencing them with demographic data. The patterns didn't surprise her, but they confirmed what she had suspected: bias had seeped into standard procedures, unchecked and unspoken. To address this, she implemented mandatory community relations training with a focus on racial bias, de-escalation, and transparency. She invited experts from local universities and retired officers with clean records and respected reputations. Officers groaned at first, particularly a few who had been on the force for over 2 decades, but Danielle made it clear, participation was not optional. "We don't serve the badge," she said during one of the sessions. "We serve the people. All of them." Outside the department, Danielle focused on building trust. She visited churches, attended PTA meetings, and even dropped by the local farmers market on Saturdays to talk casually with residents. Coffee with the Chief became a monthly event at the public library, where seniors asked about sidewalk safety and teenagers challenged her on curfews and skateboard restrictions. Danielle never dismissed a concern, no matter how small. Every interaction, she believed, was a brick in the foundation of a stronger community. Meanwhile, Karen Whitman was undergoing her own transformation, albeit in a more private, difficult way. The social media backlash had died down, but the stigma remained. Her name had become a quiet punchline in hushed conversations at the grocery store and in eye-rolling glances from former friends at Sunday brunch. Her volunteer invitations dried up. Her opinions, once taken as gospel at HOA meetings, were now politely ignored. And yet, Karen kept showing up. She completed the inclusion training, volunteered at the Duskboro Youth Center, and began attending local history lectures that focused on civil rights and race in suburban America. At first, she sat stiffly in the back, arms crossed. But slowly, something shifted. The stories of redlining, school segregation, and sundown towns hit uncomfortably close to home. She had always seen herself as someone who didn't see color, but now she was learning just how much privilege came from not having to. One Saturday afternoon, the youth center hosted a mural painting event for kids. Danielle stopped by out of curiosity and found herself surrounded by bright colors, giggling children, and the unmistakable scent of acrylic paint. A banner read, "Our community, our home." The mural itself featured dozens of handprints, red, yellow, brown, pink, all circling a bold, painted sun. At the far end of the wall stood Karen, paintbrush in hand, helping a little boy outline his palm. Their eyes met across the room. Karen nodded. Danielle, after a moment's pause, nodded back. That moment, small as it was, rippled through Duskboro. The following Monday, Danielle returned to work to find a letter on her desk. It was from Lester Wright, the HOA board president. He thanked her for her leadership and invited her to attend the next HOA town hall as a guest speaker. "We believe the conversation you started deserves to continue," he wrote. "This time, on our terms, openly, respectfully, and together." Danielle accepted. The meeting took place at the same multipurpose room where Karen had once faced a sea of stern faces and pointed fingers. But this time, the room was arranged differently, no long tables dividing board from residents. Just rows of folding chairs, a modest podium, and a few dozen people, from teenagers to grandparents, who cared enough to show up. Danielle stood at the front, in civilian clothes, a soft blouse and slacks, her badge nowhere in sight. She wasn't there as an enforcer, but as a neighbor. "Thank you for inviting me," she began. "2 months ago, I was called a trespasser at this community's pool. Not because of anything I said or did, but because someone didn't recognize me, and assumed the worst." She let the word settle. "I filed a complaint because it was the right thing to do. But what followed was more powerful than a report. It was a conversation. A reckoning. And a choice: how do we want to treat one another in Duskboro? Who gets to belong? And who decides?" Several heads nodded slowly. "We can't change the past," Danielle continued. "But we can decide what kind of future we're building, one where people are welcomed, not watched. One where questions come from curiosity, not suspicion. One where we all take responsibility for the space we share." When she finished, the room remained silent for a moment. Then someone clapped. Then another. Within seconds, the room echoed with applause, not thunderous, but warm and real. Karen rose from her seat. People turned to look, unsure of what she would say. She cleared her throat. "I want to thank Chief Brooks," she began, her voice wavering. "Not just for what she said today, but for how she handled everything. I know I made a mistake. A painful one. And I'm sorry, for her, and for anyone else I've ever made feel like they didn't belong." She glanced down, then back up. "It's taken me time to understand what that day at the pool really meant. But I'm listening now. I promise I'm listening." There was no standing ovation. No dramatic forgiveness. Just a quiet, collective breath of relief. It was enough. After the meeting, Danielle stayed behind to chat with residents. A woman in her 60s approached her, holding a Tupperware of lemon bars. "My name's Sandra," she said, smiling. "I just wanted to say thank you for sticking it out. It's not easy, what you're doing." Danielle took a lemon bar. "Thank you. It helps knowing people care." Sandra patted her arm. "You're doing more than just your job, honey. You're changing hearts." As the crowd thinned, Danielle walked outside into the cool evening air. The crickets chirped in the bushes, and the stars were beginning to blink through the fading light. Across the lawn, kids played tag, their laughter echoing under the lamplights. Duskboro was far from perfect. But it was learning. Later that week, Danielle received a handwritten letter in her mailbox, no return address, just a plain white envelope. Inside was a short note. "Dear Chief Brooks. Thank you for giving me the chance to be better. You didn't have to, but you did. I won't waste it. Karen." There was no grand redemption arc, no miraculous transformation. But there was growth. And in a town like Duskboro, that was more than enough. The confrontation at the pool had started with suspicion, but it ended with something stronger than apologies. It ended with understanding. Not just between two women, but across a community. Danielle's leadership had proven that justice wasn't just about law enforcement, it was about connection, compassion, and holding even the most awkward conversations when it mattered most. And as autumn settled in, painting the trees in burnt oranges and golden yellows, Duskboro looked less like a place trying to forget a painful moment and more like a town learning to grow from it. By early October, the air in Duskboro had shifted, not just in temperature, but in tone. The summer confrontation that had once polarized the community now echoed in softer ways. There was less whispering in grocery store aisles, fewer side glances at community events. The town wasn't healed completely, but it had begun to breathe differently. People were more conscious of their words, a little slower to judge. It was as if Duskboro had been jolted awake, and now, cautiously, it was learning how to walk again. For Chief Danielle Brooks, that shift was visible in her day-to-day life. At the police station, the grumbling about training had subsided. Officer Delgado even volunteered to co-lead the next community workshop on de-escalation. And Officer Higgins had started hosting short, walk-and-talks through local neighborhoods, encouraging residents to chat with officers in a relaxed setting. Slowly, Danielle's vision was becoming reality, not through sweeping reform decrees, but through small, consistent action. One of her proudest moments came mid-October when she launched the Duskboro Community Liaison Program. It paired officers with neighborhood blocks to increase direct communication and build trust. Danielle made it clear from day one, these weren't patrol assignments. Officers were expected to get to know residents, attend HOA meetings, and even volunteer at local schools or events. She led by example, signing up for the blocks that included the community pool and the youth center, two places with deep significance for the town and for her. Meanwhile, Karen Whitman was trying to rebuild, not her reputation, which she had accepted might never fully return, but her purpose. After the restorative justice meeting and her public apology, something inside her had shifted. She couldn't undo the hurt she caused, but she could try to be useful in a different way. She started volunteering twice a week at the Duskboro Youth Center. At first, her presence raised eyebrows. Some parents were wary. A few teenagers openly ignored her. But she didn't flinch. She showed up early, stayed late, cleaned paintbrushes, organized snacks, helped kids with homework. Slowly, those walls began to crumble. One afternoon, a 10-year-old girl named Lily asked her, "Miss Karen, were you the lady who was mean to the police chief?" Karen froze. The room went quiet. "Yes," she said softly. "I was. And I was wrong." The girl stared at her for a long moment. Then she shrugged. "You're nicer now." Karen blinked hard, biting back tears. It was the kind of moment that didn't make the news, didn't go viral, but it mattered. In mid-October, the Duskboro HOA hosted its annual Fall Festival, a beloved tradition of hayrides, pumpkin painting, and potluck dinners on the sprawling lawn near the town's Central Park. The festival had always been about community pride, but this year, it carried something heavier, a need for unity, even healing. The weeks leading up to the event had been filled with whispers. Would Karen show up? Would Danielle? Could they be in the same space without reigniting tension? As the festival approached, Danielle was invited to give a short welcome speech, not as a chief, but as a resident. On the day of the festival, the park was vibrant with color. Orange and yellow streamers fluttered from trees. Tables overflowed with homemade pies, cornbread, and baked macaroni. Children ran in face paint, holding caramel apples, while a bluegrass band played near the gazebo. It felt almost like a movie set, idyllic, warm, American to the core. Danielle arrived in jeans and a maroon sweater, blending in but still drawing glances. She walked slowly through the crowd, stopping to greet residents, many of whom smiled or waved. A few older men tipped their hats. Some children pointed and whispered, "That's the chief." She smiled at each one, never hurried, never distant. At the far end of the park, near a mural station where kids were painting pumpkins and canvas boards, Danielle spotted something unexpected: Karen, standing beside a display table, handing out cider and cookies. She looked calm, even a little nervous. Her presence there was not an announcement, it was a quiet commitment. They made eye contact. Danielle took a step closer. Karen straightened, then hesitated, unsure whether to smile or brace herself. "Hi, Miss Whitman," Danielle said warmly, using the same formality Karen once used to challenge her. "How's the cider?" Karen blinked, then let out a shaky chuckle. "Hot and overspiced, but the kids love it." Danielle nodded. "Good to see you here." Karen's lips parted as if to respond, but for once, she didn't try to over-explain or apologize again. She simply said, "You too." Later that afternoon, Danielle stepped up to the microphone near the gazebo. The crowd hushed. Autumn leaves rustled gently in the trees. The scent of kettle corn and pumpkin spice hung in the air. "Good afternoon, neighbors," she began. "Some of you know me as Chief Brooks. Others just as Danielle. I moved here not too long ago, and my welcome to Duskboro was, well, memorable." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. "But what I've come to see over these past months is something deeper than that one moment. I've seen neighbors choosing to listen instead of shout. Choosing to stay in uncomfortable conversations. Choosing to show up even after they've made mistakes." She glanced briefly toward Karen, who stood quietly near the refreshment table, her head slightly bowed. "This community isn't perfect. No place is. But what makes Duskboro special isn't that nothing ever goes wrong, it's that we have the courage to make it right." The crowd applauded, some even standing. Danielle stepped down, heart thudding, not from nerves, but from the overwhelming sense that maybe, just maybe, the town had turned a corner. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting golden light over the park, a photographer from the local paper snapped photos of families carving pumpkins, neighbors laughing over cider, and children adding finishing touches to the community mural. That mural, designed by a group of kids under the guidance of the youth center, was titled "One Home, Many Hands." Danielle stood beside it at one point, admiring the handprints, the colors, the names scribbled in crayon. And beside her, for just a moment, stood Karen. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to. A few feet away, a woman in her 70s named Marjorie watched the two of them with quiet awe. She leaned over to her husband and whispered, "Would you look at that?" Two women who could have stayed bitter. But they didn't. That evening, after the festival had ended and the tables were cleared, Danielle returned home. She took off her boots, lit a cinnamon-scented candle on the windowsill, and sat by the fireplace with a mug of chamomile tea. Her dog, Pepper, curled up by her feet. The room was quiet, but her mind hummed with memories of the day. Not just the smiles and applause, but the small glances, the shared nods, the tentative steps people took toward one another. She picked up her notepad and jotted a line. "Progress doesn't look like fireworks. It looks like a handshake. A shared table. A child's drawing. A second chance." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. Halloween was around the corner, followed by Thanksgiving, and then the slow drift into winter. Danielle knew more challenges would come, old habits die hard, and bias never disappears with a single apology. But she also knew this, Duskboro had proven it could choose the harder path. The better path. And she would be there to walk it with them, every step of the way. As the last leaves of October scattered across Duskboro's sidewalks and Halloween decorations were slowly replaced by harvest wreaths and Thanksgiving banners, Chief Danielle Brooks found herself preparing for one of her most important initiatives yet, a town-wide public safety and inclusion forum, set to take place at the Duskboro Community Center. Unlike formal city council meetings or police department updates, this forum would be open to everyone. No rigid agendas, no podiums, just a series of round tables, coffee urns, and space for honest conversation. Danielle had titled the event, "Bridging the Gap, Safety, Trust, and Belonging in Duskboro." And she didn't just want to speak, she wanted to listen. The forum had been Karen Whitman's idea, surprisingly. After the fall festival, Karen had approached Danielle outside the library. Her voice was cautious, respectful. "I've been thinking," she said. "A lot of folks here still carry tension, even if they smile through it. Maybe if we had a place to talk, really talk, it might help. And if you let it, people would show up." Danielle looked at her for a long moment, surprised by the suggestion but not dismissive. "I think that could work," she said. "But only if people come to it ready to listen, not lecture." Karen gave a faint, hopeful smile. "I'll help however I can." That's how, 3 weeks later, the community center's multipurpose hall was transformed. Officers in plain clothes greeted residents at the door with coffee and pastries from Millie's Cafe, name tags were handed out, and round tables were labeled with open-ended questions like, "What does safety mean to you?" and, "Have you ever felt you didn't belong here?" Danielle arrived early, walking the room, checking in with volunteers, and welcoming early guests with warm handshakes. By 6 p.m., the hall was buzzing, seniors, teens, church pastors, small business owners, long-time residents, and newcomers alike. Officer Delgado facilitated the first circle. Officer Higgins took the second. Danielle floated between tables, quietly observing. At one table, a middle-aged white man named Tom, a retired firefighter, spoke candidly. "I've lived here 35 years, he said, "and to be honest, I didn't see the need for all this at first. But after what happened this summer, I realized, maybe I've been blind to things that didn't affect me directly." Across from him sat Alyssa Tran, a second-generation Vietnamese American whose family had lived in the neighborhood for just 5 years. She nodded. "It's easy to feel invisible in a town like this," she said. "Like being polite is more important than being seen. But now, I feel like we're finally having the right conversations." A few tables over, Karen herself was seated between 2 teenagers, Jamal and Lila, both black, both born in Duskboro. They spoke openly about being followed in stores or being told, "You're so articulate," as though it were a compliment. Karen listened. Really listened. By the end of the evening, Danielle stood to close the event. She didn't give a long speech. She didn't need to. "I want to thank all of you," she said, "for showing up, for sitting in the discomfort. Change doesn't come from agreeing on everything. It comes from being willing to hear what you've never had to before. Let's keep this going, not as an event, but as a habit." The room applauded, not out of obligation, but with sincerity. The forum was a turning point, not as dramatic as the pool incident, but just as important. It didn't trend on social media. No headlines were written. But in the weeks that followed, Danielle began receiving emails and handwritten letters from residents expressing gratitude, telling stories they'd never shared before. Some even offered to host future events at their homes or churches. Still, not everyone welcomed the changes. A small but vocal minority within the HOA began grumbling. "Too political," they muttered. "We never used to have these problems." At one particularly tense HOA meeting, a member named Frank Dalton raised his voice. "This town is changing too fast," he said. "I didn't move here to be lectured. I moved here to raise a family in peace." Danielle was in attendance, sitting quietly in the back. She stood. "With all due respect, Mr. Dalton," she said, "no one here is being lectured. We're simply making room for everyone to have peace, not just those who've always had it." There was a pause. Then, Lester Wright, the HOA president, added, "That's right. And if anyone's uncomfortable with inclusion, perhaps it's not the town that's changed, it's just catching up." The murmurs quieted. In late November, just before Thanksgiving, Danielle received an invitation from the First United Church of Duskboro, a congregation that had long served as a moral cornerstone of the town. Reverend Helen Morris, a black woman in her 70s, had pastored the church for decades. The event was a community potluck, where each family brought a dish representing their heritage. Danielle brought baked macaroni and cheese, using her late grandmother's recipe. Karen arrived with a tray of sweet potato pie and cornbread, both made using a recipe she'd learned at a cultural cooking class hosted by the youth center. The mood was warm, familial. Children performed a short skit about kindness. A local string quartet played soft hymns. Reverend Morris stood and offered a brief reflection. "Love thy neighbor," she said, looking around the room. Not just the ones who look like you. Not just the ones who talk like you. But all of them. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Karen wiped her eyes with a napkin. As the evening wound down, Danielle and Karen found themselves standing together near the dessert table. "This is different," Karen said, glancing at the room. "The dusk burrow I knew never looked like this." Danielle took a sip of cider. Maybe it always had the potential to. It just needed people willing to let go of comfort for the sake of connection. Karen nodded slowly. "I'm trying." "I know," Danielle said. "Keep doing the work." Outside, the air had grown crisp. Holiday lights flickered along Main Street. The town felt both new and familiar, like a place that had finally decided to grow without forgetting who lived in its roots. And as Danielle walked to her car that night, her heart was full, not because everything was perfect, but because, for the first time, it felt like it could be. The first snowfall arrived early in Duskboro that year, thin and soft, more a dusting than a storm, but enough to transform the familiar streets into a quiet, white canvas. The holidays were approaching, and with them came the town's annual Winter Lights Parade, a cherished tradition where neighbors lined Main Street sipping hot cocoa and watching floats drift by, twinkling with lights and music. But this year's parade carried more weight. It would be the first since that unforgettable summer afternoon at the community pool, the incident that had shaken Duskboro to its core and forced it to reckon with what kind of town it truly wanted to be. Chief Danielle Brooks had been invited by the mayor to serve as the parade's honorary grand marshal. It was meant to symbolize unity and the town's commitment to inclusion. But Danielle wasn't sure she wanted the spotlight again, not for this. It felt too performative, too symbolic when the work was still so unfinished. That uncertainty didn't go unnoticed. One afternoon, as she stood in her office watching snowflakes tap against the window, Officer Clara Delgado knocked lightly and stepped in, 2 paper cups in hand. "Hot chocolate." "With cinnamon," Clara said, offering one to Danielle. "You always know," Danielle smiled, accepting it. Clara hesitated, then said, "I know you're debating the parade. Everyone's talking about it." Danielle sighed, sitting on the edge of her desk. "I'm not sure if it's the right move. I don't want to turn into some hometown mascot." "You're not," Clara said gently. "You're the one who helped this place grow up a little. That's something to celebrate. People want to see that the story didn't end at the pool, they want to see what came next." Danielle looked at her thoughtfully, then nodded. "Maybe you're right." A week later, as the parade wove through town, Danielle rode in a modest open-top SUV, wrapped in a wool coat and knit scarf. Children waved small flags, seniors clapped warmly as she passed. The banner on the vehicle read, "Honoring Chief Danielle Brooks, for leadership with grace." She waved, smiled, and soaked in the moment, but quietly. Her eyes scanned the crowd not for fanfare, but for faces. She saw Officer Higgins holding his baby daughter, Karen Whitman passing out hot cider beside a local scout troop, and Reverend Morris standing arm in arm with her choir. It wasn't about her. It was about what they had built, together, even if it had started with something as painful as prejudice. After the parade, Danielle didn't linger. She returned home, fed her dog Pepper, and curled up on the couch with a blanket and a book. Her quiet evening was interrupted, however, by a soft knock on the door. She opened it to find Karen Whitman, bundled in a beige coat and holding a small box. "I hope this isn't weird," Karen said. "I just wanted to drop this off." Danielle raised an eyebrow, motioning for her to come inside. "What is it?" Karen stepped in, brushing snow from her collar. "It's a set of ornaments. Handmade. From the youth center kids. They painted them with words they think describe Duskboro now. I thought you should have the first set." Danielle opened the box. Inside were 6 small wooden ornaments, painted in uneven strokes: respect, courage, listening, justice, community, change. Her throat tightened. They did these themselves. Karen nodded. Every word was their idea. Danielle placed the lid back on gently. Thank you, Karen. This means a lot. Karen smiled, a little sadly. I've learned that sometimes, when you break something, you don't get to be the hero of the story. But you can still help clean up the mess. Danielle nodded. You've done more than that. Keep showing up. That's what matters. As Christmas approached, Danielle stayed busy. The department's Gifts for Families drive was in full swing, and she was determined to make sure no child in Duskboro went without a toy or a warm coat. She personally delivered gift cards to single mothers who had lost jobs during the year and arranged for officers to serve holiday meals at the local shelter. Yet amid the cheer, an unexpected issue arose. A Latino family, Carlos and Maribel Santiago and their 2 children, had recently moved into a rental home on Birchwood Lane. Within weeks, they reported 3 different incidents of neighbors calling the police on them for looking suspicious as they unloaded groceries, shoveled snow, and once while their teenage son walked to a friend's house. Danielle was furious, not outwardly, but inside, a fire sparked. It was the same pattern all over again. She visited the Santiagos personally. They were kind, reserved, and hesitant to stir more trouble. Carlos, a mechanic, shook her hand firmly but with tired eyes. Maribel offered coffee and explained, in quiet frustration, that she just wanted to live in peace. Their son, Mateo, stayed mostly silent, his shoulders tense. You shouldn't have to prove your right to exist in your own neighborhood, Danielle said. I'm sorry this has happened. And I'm going to make sure it doesn't keep happening. Back at the station, she reviewed the 911 calls. One came from a woman on the HOA board. Another from a man who had never filed a report before. Both cited strange behavior and possible burglary. Neither had approached the family directly. Danielle called a closed-door meeting with HOA leaders and select residents from Birchwood Lane. She brought in Officer Delgado and Reverend Morris to help mediate. Let me be clear, Danielle began, Duskboro will not tolerate racial profiling. Not from the police. Not from residents. Not in whispers. Not in calls. Not in silence. Lester Wright, the HOA president, nodded solemnly. We need new rules for member conduct, and clearer boundaries for what constitutes harassment. Karen, who had been invited as a community representative, looked across the table. What happened to the Santiago family is exactly the kind of thing that happened to Danielle. We can't go backward. We have to do better. A resolution passed. A new HOA conduct policy was adopted. And soon after, Danielle launched a Know Your Neighbor campaign, a simple program encouraging residents to meet those on their block, exchange contact info, and build connections. It wasn't mandatory, but participation was high. Fear, she believed, lost power in the face of familiarity. By New Year's Eve, Duskboro had changed. Not perfectly. Not forever. But deeply. That night, Danielle attended the town's modest countdown celebration in the park. Families gathered with sparklers and thermoses. Children wrote hopes for the new year on paper lanterns. As midnight approached, Reverend Morris led a short prayer. Let us enter the new year with hearts wide open. With eyes that see past fear, and hands ready to build bridges. Danielle stood with Pepper's leash in one hand and a paper lantern in the other. On it, she'd written one word, trust. As the crowd counted down, 3, 2, 1. The lanterns lifted into the cold sky, flickering like stars. And as they rose, Danielle looked around at the town she now called home. A town that had faltered. A town that had faced itself in the mirror. A town still growing, but willing. A town worth believing in. January rolled in with a quiet stillness over Duskboro. The festive decorations were slowly packed away, and the town settled back into its winter rhythm, school drop-offs, snow shoveling, coffee sipped over quiet mornings. But beneath the calm surface, a deeper shift had taken root. The town that once teetered on the edge of division had begun to define itself by its efforts to grow, not perfectly, but earnestly. Chief Danielle Brooks continued her work with unshaken resolve. The Know Your Neighbor initiative gained traction. More than 24 streets had organized potlucks, book exchanges, and walking groups. Even residents who had never spoken beyond a polite nod now shared laughter over chili cook-offs and snowball fights. Connections that once seemed impossible now felt natural, necessary. At the department, Danielle took a bold next step, establishing the Dusk Borough Community Accountability Board. Comprised of officers, clergy, teachers, students, and everyday residents, including Karen Whitman, it was designed to review community complaints, recommend policy adjustments, and advise on departmental transparency. It wasn't a formality, it had teeth. Danielle made sure of it. The first meeting took place in early February in the town library's large conference room. Danielle opened with a clear message: accountability isn't a threat. It's a promise. A promise to serve with integrity and to listen when we fall short. The board's first case was sobering. A local teen named Devin Marshall had been stopped by police while walking home from basketball practice. No arrest, no citation, but Devin, a quiet, straight-A student, had been shaken. His mother submitted a formal complaint, not seeking punishment, but answers. The officers involved said they were responding to a call about a suspicious figure in a hoodie. When Danielle asked if the caller had described any behavior beyond walking quickly, the answer was no. The board reviewed the body cam footage. It was clear, Devin was respectful. The stop had been unnecessary. Karen, sitting stiffly at the edge of the table, spoke up. That could have been avoided if the caller had simply known Devin. Or trusted that a teenager in a hoodie isn't a threat. Danielle nodded. Which is exactly why community trust must replace community suspicion. Devin and his mother were invited to share their experience at the next public board meeting. Devin, shy at first, stood in front of nearly 50 residents, clutching his father's hand. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said, voice trembling. "But I still felt like I didn't belong. I shouldn't have to feel that way in my own town." The room was silent. Then slowly, respectfully, it erupted into applause. Reverend Morris later called it a sacred moment. And it was. One of many to come. The board recommended new dispatch guidelines for low-level suspicion calls, including a 2-tier review system. Officers were trained to respond with increased discretion and context. Danielle implemented it within a week. Meanwhile, Danielle and Karen began appearing together at local high schools and community events, not as symbols, but as witnesses to what growth and reconciliation looked like. They never sugarcoated the past, but they showed, by standing side by side, that the future didn't have to mirror it. At a Martin Luther King Jr. Day assembly, Danielle was the keynote speaker. Students, teachers, and parents filled the high school gymnasium, the bleachers buzzing with chatter. Danielle stepped up to the mic in a simple gray blazer, her words echoing softly through the room. "When I first arrived here," she began, "I was told this was a peaceful town. And in many ways, it was. But peace without justice is just quiet. And justice without compassion is just noise. What I've seen over the past months is a community willing to turn down the noise and finally listen." She paused, scanning the audience. Dr. King said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. But I believe something else, it only bends if we pull." A standing ovation followed. Among the crowd, Karen wiped a tear from her cheek. Later that evening, Danielle returned home to find a package on her porch. Inside was a framed photograph from the parade, Danielle, waving modestly from the open SUV, Karen handing cider to a child in the background. Attached was a note, handwritten in looping cursive. "You showed us how to bend the arc. Thank you for pulling with us. Lester Wright and the HOA board." Spring approached. The snow melted slowly, revealing patches of grass and the first hints of crocus buds pushing through the thaw. And with it came the planning of something entirely new for Duskboro, a unity garden. The idea originated from the students at the youth center. "We want a space," they said, "where people can grow things together. Something lasting. Visible. Shared." Danielle loved the concept. She helped secure a small grant from the county, and the town donated a corner lot near the community pool, where the summer's pain had begun. Breaking ground for the Unity Garden became an event in itself. Shovels were passed from child to elder, from police officer to student, from longtime resident to new neighbor. The soil was cold, but everyone's hands were warm. Karen was given the honor of planting the first seed, a red tulip bulb. She knelt carefully, pressing it into the earth. Danielle followed with a lavender bush. "It's for peace," she said softly. By April, the garden bloomed into color. Tomatoes. Daisies. Peppers. Marigolds. Basil. A mural fence rose behind it, painted by students, spelling out in bold, bright letters, "We all belong here." The mural included handprints from residents, Danielle's in deep navy blue, Karen's in orange, Mateo Santiago's in green, Devin Marshall's in yellow. A rainbow of fingerprints wove around the phrase like a hug. One afternoon, as Danielle stood watering a new patch of herbs, a young girl approached her. She couldn't have been more than 6. She pointed at the mural and asked, "Did you write that?" Danielle smiled. "No," she said. "We did." The little girl nodded, then skipped away, her pigtails bouncing. That night, Danielle sat on her porch with Pepper curled at her feet, watching the last light fade from the sky. She sipped chamomile tea, the steam curling into the cool evening air. Across the street, neighbors chatted under porch lights. Children rode bikes up and down the sidewalk. No one looked over their shoulder. No one questioned who belonged. The pool, once a place of confrontation, now hosted weekend community swim days, with sign-in sheets replaced by smiles and familiar nods. Duskboro was still a small town. It still had quiet streets and tree-lined sidewalks. But now, it also had something stronger than appearances. It had resilience. It had truth. It had a memory, and a promise not to repeat it. And at the heart of that promise stood Danielle Brooks, no longer just the police chief, but a symbol of what it means to lead with both strength and heart. Not by erasing the hard moments, but by honoring them. By choosing to pull the arc. And teaching others how to pull too. The story of Chief Danielle Brooks and the town of Duskboro reminds us that real change doesn't happen overnight, it happens in small moments, hard conversations, and a willingness to see each other fully. When we confront prejudice not with vengeance but with compassion and courage, we open the door to healing, not just for ourselves, but for entire communities. Whether you've been harmed or made a mistake, there's always a path toward understanding and growth. It's not easy, but it's worth it. If this story moved you, made you reflect, or reminded you of someone in your life, it would mean a lot if you showed your support. Like the video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts or a similar experience, and subscribe to our channel for more true stories that speak to the heart. Your voice helps build a space where stories like these aren't just told, they're felt. Let's keep growing, together.